Something is really, really fishy with the Vancouver Canucks. And this has sort of been a thing that we've kind of had in the very far background, like, it's deep in the crevices of Vancouver Canucks lore, these little pieces of information that have sort of brought themselves up to the surface over the past few days here, because when it comes to Vancouver Canucks forward Tanner Pearson, the club confirmed a few days ago that Pearson is going to require surgery. And not just any surgery, this would happen to be the second hand surgery after a setback in his recovery. He will miss the remainder of the 2022-2023 season. Additional information here from the Canucks on January 12th. Pearson's surgery yesterday on the 11th was his second procedure since the original surgery in November. Now, all Tanner Pearson is bad memes aside, you never want to see a guy go through an extended recovery process like Tanner Pearson is going through. Not only the fact that he is going to be out for the remainder of the year, and there are also rumors that this might end his hockey career, period, but the fact that this was the second surgery done on a similar injury after already having surgery done in November. Having a surgery, waiting 2 months, and then having to do another surgery on the same hand, that's kind of brutal. And for Tanner Pearson, of course, we all wish for the best with this guy and his recovery. It's just more than unfortunate that this entire process is going to sideline him for the rest of 2022-2023 and potentially his career. So, we have ourselves this situation here. Pearson's back in the news. He's having surgery. It's whatever. This is where things get really, really fishy. Because after the Pearson surgery was announced, they had an interview with Quinn Hughes. This was post-game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, where they asked Hughes about Tanner Pearson's season and his injury being over and everything. Hughes says that wasn't handled right. Now that's a small, very small comment, but what exactly does that mean? Quinn Hughes later clarified this same statement the next day, talking about how, it's about the team and, he's being frustrated and everything and whatever. There was an Ian McIntyre article going out there about Hughes pretty much backtracking these comments about how it wasn't handled right, the Tanner Pearson news and everything. And so, we then had ourselves an episode of Donnie and Dolly. This was the first segment from yesterday's show talking about Tanner Pearson's injury and the timeline since he originally got hurt. And this is the summary from Taj. He goes out there and quote tweets the Dolly Wall clip. "This story is crazy," he says. 3 or 4 procedures already. There's a possibility of more procedures for Pearson. He's dealing with an infection as well. There is no guarantee that he'll be back next year, and this might be career-threatening. Now, obviously, these are terrible points, but it's all talked about in the video over here. And since Dolly Wall is a guy that probably does have his NHL insider information, we gotta know that he's always been in the scoop. It's been like that for years. This sort of information is incredibly concerning, especially when you consider just the magnitude as to how Pearson is going to have to leave the team, potentially even for the rest of his career. This is really bad, and it gets even worse when you talk about the other elements of this. Farhan Lalji made an appearance on TSN yesterday. He talks about the Canucks' weird history of dealing with hand injuries other than Pearson. Boeser had to sit out after coming back from hand surgery, and the scar opened up. Jason Dickinson also wasn't happy playing with a hand injury that went undetected. Pearson has had 3 surgeries already, and it's possible that he may need more. And this is sort of where you start to get into uncharted territory. Because as we have said, over the past few years, Brock Boeser has never had the same wrist ever since all the crap happened in earlier parts of his career post-Jake Virtanen, Cal Clutterbuck situation. Sure, in the first season that Boeser played, he was taken out because of the back thing. The door was open, he got reverse hit into the door, and it was bad. But there were also very well-documented reports of hand surgery and Brock's wrist, and that was always an issue of conversation over the past few years, how Brock could never shoot it the same way that he was able to in his rookie year. Wrist surgery, wrist surgery, wrist surgery. It was always the wrist surgery. He had Jason Dickinson play for Vancouver last season after getting signed, and Dickinson was terrible in Vancouver. Really, really bad. Like, I can't understate how ineffective Jason Dickinson was as a member of the Vancouver Canucks, but he was bad. He then gets traded over to Chicago. The Chicago doctors tell him that he played all of last season with a hand injury that did not go detected, and now Jason Dickinson is not bad. He's like okay. He's like a middle-to-bottom six defensively responsible penalty-killing center who can get points. That is what Dickinson was supposed to be for Vancouver, but he was nothing near that. And you had this same element brought up that Dickinson had a hand injury that we didn't know about. Only Chicago doctors went out there after he got traded and said, oh, you were playing with this injury. And us Canucks fans were like, wait a minute, he was? Now you have yourselves Ian McIntyre, who earlier yesterday said, Jim Rutherford confirms the club is investigating its handling of the Tanner Pearson injury. He says he was unaware of any questions about medical care until Quinn Hughes spoke out. Rutherford wants all parties summit to discuss what was done and why. Story coming. The first reply here from Adam Graham says, so the fact that a 4-week recovery turned into a second hand surgery and additional 6 months of recovery didn't set off alarm bells on its own? He didn't think anyone might have made a mistake up until a player brought it up? Sounds like he was asleep at the wheel. Now, of course, that last part is kind of taking shots at an old man for the sake of taking shots at an old man, but realistically, I mean, there have been so many patterns of guys that have had terrible handlings of their hands over the years, and Pearson, Brock, this Dickinson situation, these aren't even the only things. You know, everybody talks about Petey. Petey had a wrist problem too sometime in the past little while. He eventually overcame that, and he's sort of the same player like he was when he was absolutely clapping bombs left, right, and center before, but it could have been worse. Brock is no longer that guy on the left side. Pearson may never play again. And might I remind you that this entire injury thing with Vancouver is not necessarily the newest thing to hear about. How many times have you seen a Canuck go out there and get injured, he's day to day, only for him to turn into week to week, only for that same guy to be out for months? Why does this happen? What is wrong with the Vancouver Canucks and their medical staff? They removed a whole bunch of names the past little while here, ever since Rutherford was brought on board. So many names that were familiar with Canucks fans in the medical staff, like Roger Takahashi, for example, were removed. And it's a new staff now. But these problems are still happening. Heck, you could debate they're even worse. Normally, I don't want to single out very independent parts of an organization, but for Vancouver Canucks medical, it's been really fishy. Very fishy. You can't tell me otherwise. It was fishy before this Tanner Pearson thing. It's just now there's a big opportunity to talk about it because not only has it been brought up that Pearson is going from 4 weeks to multiple surgeries, more than 2 surgeries, potentially a life-threatening hand thing, and you have all the other crap that had been brought up in the past as well regarding people in their hands, but you still have the rest of the inconsistencies with this medical staff of how guys are always needing extra time after initially having timelines of, let's say, day-to-day, for example, or week-to-week. This is very weird. And I know other NHL teams have inconsistencies with their scouting for injuries and stuff. Oh, sometimes guys who say that they're day-to-day end up becoming week-to-week. It happens. But with Vancouver, I feel like this happens to an abnormally high extent that all of a sudden it makes sense to talk about it as if it's an issue already. So let me know in the comments your thoughts about the Canucks and their medical situation. How can this team get any worse? We're talking about the on-ice product, how they're losing all the time, but now it's oh, their medical staff. That's questionable. That's really bad. This organization needs a shakeup, dude. So the team, Francesco, please tell me in the comments your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.